Olive Edis was a remarkable photographer working in the early 20th century. At the beginning of June 2018, Sheringham Museum's Olive Edis exhibition was opened by an actor playing the part of Olive.
I declare my exhibition open. Olive Edis was born into a professional, comfortable family, but her father died when she was 17 and her sisters were 13, so she was the mainstay of the family. When she got interested in photography and came up to Sheringham, it was very much disapproved of. It was not at all the thing for young ladies to enter business. But that didn't seem to stop Olive. She relocated largely to Sheringham in 1905 and started taking photos of the local people and also people within her own network who were very much the great and the good. Her great-uncle, John Murray, was Surgeon General, and he made his own cameras and his own film. We have a little written piece on the back of her first portrait, which was of Caroline Murray, her cousin. She wrote on it, "This was my first portrait taken in 1900, which turned my fate." Olive and Catherine, one of her younger sisters, started doing some photography, and they got themselves in some trouble when they came up here because they obviously had a parcel of land in Church Street and they erected an old shed and ran foul of the planning authorities who told them it was too near the next house or the road or something. But after that, they actually built a proper studio. One of her other uncles, Robert Edis, was a well-known architect. He built her first studio, and then when they relocated some years later, built a second studio for her in South Street. And he did exactly as Olive wanted. She wanted a reproduction of her first studio, which she liked so much, which had natural light coming in.
Olive Edis made South Street her Norfolk home, with her studio in the back garden.
We don't have a lot of information about the layout of Olive's studio. She obviously had an area where she took her photographs, and we think that was equipped with a grand piano. It had a window a little bit like the one that appears in this exhibition here. We have to remember that in those days there was no electricity in Sheringham. She used sunlight, of course, for most of her images, but she couldn't enlarge anything. Wouldn't have had any of the luxuries we have of electric timers and that sort of thing for processing. If you look at her work, they are platinum prints in general. Platinum prints are highly prized these days, and very few photographers actually get around to making them. She was always interested in colour, and that is why I think Olive was happy to take on experimenting with autochromes later when they became available in the UK. She took to that with some enthusiasm, I think, and in fact was one of the leading exponents of autochrome photography in the country. Olive developed quite a particular style of photograph. She almost universally photographed people against a dark cloth background. This has the advantage of focusing people's attention on the face of the sitter. She also used the techniques that had been perfected by the French Impressionists, of northern light. She had her studio equipped with a glass roof facing the north, so that she had that lovely soft northern light to stop the formation of heavy shadows on people's faces.
Olive Edis photographed an amazing range of personalities, from kings to poets to politicians, as well as ordinary townsfolk.
One of her main areas of expertise were those pictures that she took of the local fishermen, as she called them, fisherfolk. And she took those in the early 1900s, and she did her last exhibition of them in 1951 as a celebration of the Great Exhibition in 1851. She had a very well-connected family, but because her work was so good, it then attracted others by word of mouth. And let's face it, at that time they couldn't do selfies, so people did have their photos taken. She photographed Prince Henry, who was the Duke of Gloucester, Prince Albert, who became George VI, the Queen's father, and also the Prince of Wales, who went on to become King Edward VIII, who abdicated in 1936. She had a great friendship with the Bishop of London. There were tales that she might marry him, but they didn't marry, and in fact he officiated at Olive and Edwin Galsworthy's wedding, which happened when she was 52, so she was not someone who rushed into it. Her sisters, who were 4 years younger than her, got married when they were in their early 20s, I guess. But Olive was going off to be a war photographer when she was 42.
It was the National War Museum, now known as the Imperial War Museum, that commissioned Olive to cross the Channel.
The brief was to photograph women's services in France and Belgium. She was actually the first female photographer to go to the 1418 war. They had an old car that they took that was driven by a chap called Daddy Blow. They went from France into Belgium. She recounts taking a photograph of a number of women's services that she had to somehow corral into a photograph. And she signed a form which said that she was not allowed to take any photographs or any images. And that was the sole purpose of her journey. But she said, oh, well, I just signed it.
In 1920, Olive Edis received a request from the Canadian Pacific Railway. She was to take colour plates of the Rockies.
Part of that commission was to go into the backwoods and photograph Indigenous people and the countryside. She was travelling to begin with on a special car that had a darkroom and a bedroom, and it sounds fairly luxurious. But then she struck out for the backwoods with donkeys and backpacks. After that, she did that bit, she went down into America to see some other cousins and was beguiled by the movies and worked with someone who was the director for a time. And when she came back, she apparently made some very small, what we might call documentaries of a wedding. She also took a film of some family picnics, and she did one in Holland of the tulips.
Olive Edis was fascinated by colour. As colour photography was in its infancy, she found another way round.
She was so keen to have colour that she decided she would paint over them. And when that works, it is luminous, it is fantastic. I don't think she saw herself necessarily as a painter, but she wanted to bring her images to life.
Ron Wiebe has been responsible for the digital displays and photographic restoration at the Sheringham Museum.
First of all, there's a rule: you don't touch the original, you don't damage it in any way, you don't change it in any way. So I scan the original in the greatest possible resolution. I also scan it in full colour, even though it might be a black and white negative. And the reason for that is degradation in negatives often shows up as a change in colour, especially around the edges. So what I do is I scan in full colour, and then when in Photoshop, when you convert the colour image into a black and white image, you can control each colour component separately. Beyond that, it's a matter of usually just cleaning up spots, and that's easily done with a cloning tool. It stood the test of time remarkably well.
Olive Edis was a really remarkable woman, and the more I learn about her, the more I'd like to have met her.
The Olive Edis exhibition is at the Sheringham Museum at the Mow until September the 23rd, 2018.